Let's also talk about the interview processes to get into these companies. This might be a slightly detailed segment where I want you to help everyone who's watching this how to clear all these interviews, let's say the private equity interviews. What would be very helpful is that if you can talk about your India interview experience versus the US interview experience of a private equity fund, that'll be super helpful. If you can give some examples, what kind of questions you were asked, how many rounds of interviews were there, and how did you answer them, tackle them, that'll be super, super helpful.
Sure. I think just a caveat, actually, no. So in India, I did a pre-MBA role, so pre-MBA associate role, right? So they're trying to test for very different things. They're trying to test how good are you with numbers and how good are you with problem solving. As you grow senior, those things are assumed or taken for you. That's some bare minimum. Then it's more about some other skills, right? How are you good at? How's your investment judgment? How are you good at underwriting a new deal? I think, or like how are you good at relationship building and networking? So those are very different skill sets. So in India, for private equity, you have multiple rounds. Can go up to like 7, 8. You're also trying to meet almost everybody in the firm, but typically it starts with it has case studies. So what a case study is basically is they'll give you an example from a deal that they have actually done. So either they have done that deal or it's a deal that they rejected, but they know a lot more about it. So they want to get your perspectives and they want to see how did they align with what they thought about it, right? When they saw it. So let's say they will be like, there's a company manufacturing bottles, right? And then do you want to invest it or not? That's going to be the problem statement. Then you have to think about what's the industry, how is the industry growing? What's the competitive dynamics? Are there any tailwinds, headwinds, regulatory risks, things like that? Once you establish, the industry seems interesting, then you look at the company. Then you're like, what's the company doing? How has it grown in the past? How is the management? What's the product? What are the services that the company is supplying? Do you see any value creation once you buy it? Like, is there any way you can add value? Either you can grow sales or cut costs. How will you exit? What are the risks? Are there any tailwinds, headwinds, things like that? So you have to think about it very holistically. Typically, you would use a framework. It could be any framework. I personally prefer just using a 2x2. If it's very common framework in consulting is like on one axis, the way I think about it in my head is on the one axis, I'm looking at all external elements, the market, competition, regulations, risks, things like that. And on the other axis, I'm looking at everything internal to the company. So how is the company grown, management, products, services, things like that. So ideally, you want to be good on both. Like if the two axes are X and Y and one is low and one is high, so you want to be on a high for both those axes. So that's how I think about it. But I think there are multiple frameworks of doing it. But the point I'm trying to make is there typically is at least one, if not more, case studies. Then you have personal interviews. You also have a modeling test. And that is very crucial because they're trying to establish how good are you with numbers, how good are you, comfortable are you with Excel, and how good are you at modeling. When I interviewed, I had done some modeling in my life, but really hadn't built these massive detailed models because I hadn't done banking. Thankfully, I had done CA, so I knew how numbers work. I think that truly still helped me in my life. It's like I can look at a balance sheet or take a look at P&L and I know what's happening and I know how to tally my balance sheet. So I mean, they gave me a weekend to do the model. I had to really teach myself how to do a model over the weekend and build the model. So on Monday, had to go and present it in person. I was very candid with them. I was like, I did not know how to model before this weekend. So please take it with a pinch of salt or whatever. But I mean, of course, they liked it, which is why I got the job. But I think those are the three main components, right? Case study, personal interview, and modeling. Here, PE recruiting works a bit different. If it's pre-MBA or post-MBA. Pre-MBA, it typically starts very soon. Also, sorry, one more difference is in India, pre-MBA recruiting, you can either do 2 years at banking and then do PE, or you can do 2 years in consulting and then do PE, especially if the PE fund does a lot of operational things, operational value creation after investing. They prefer people with a consulting background. In the US, there's a much, much, much higher percentage of people doing banking and then doing PE versus consulting. The banking thing is a very set standard path in the US. But the pre-MBA PE recruiting in the US starts pretty soon after you have your banking offer. It's to the extent that now it's become a problem where you get your banking offer, you sometimes have just started and you're already interviewing for a role which you're going to start 2 years later. The PE industry has been very famously pushing back in this cycle. So now I think it should again go back to 1 year after you start. But basically, it's going to be similar stuff, right? It's going to be a lot of modeling. There could be case studies and there could be personal interviews. This is pre-MBA. Post-MBA depends on what level you are at. If you have pre-MBA private equity experience, you probably may not join as a senior associate or associate. Maybe you join as a VP, in which case you might not need to do a modeling round. Again, it really depends on the fund. But the case study is going to be constant. So you'll have different kinds of case studies across all the interviews. If it's a decently senior, like a VP level role, they would also want to know about your past deals, especially if you have a PE experience. And I think it makes sense to point it out right now. Post MBA, getting into private equity in the US, you really, really, really need to have a pre-MBA private equity experience before. It's really tough otherwise. Yeah.
Can you give some examples of questions that you were asked in both in India and in the US, and how did you answer them? You mentioned about the modeling, you mentioned about the case studies and all, but specifically like, okay, this was the question asked and you answered it this way. This is why they like. Can you help us with that?
I think there are some very standard questions or lines of questioning in private equity interviews, right? Like they're trying to see, again, I know I'm repeating myself, but how good are you with numbers? So they could do typically like a mini model where they will either a pen and paper or just in like mental math. They will give you numbers. So let's say they'll be like, you are looking at a company with, let's say, $100 million of EBITDA. It grows by whatever percent. Let's say it grows to $200 million of EBITDA, and in 5 years, they will give you the multiple that you're buying it at. Let's say it's 10x. You exit at 10x to keep it simple. Then that gives you your enterprise value for in entry and exit. They tell you entry level debt is 500 million. So equity value is 500 million. They will tell you how the debt grows through exit, and they will ask you to compute what's the returns, right? And then typically there are these numbers. So 2x over 5 years is 15%. There are like these 2-3 combinations that you need to know. And so I think it's how you solve this, how fast you solve it, what kind of questions do you ask. I think that's one example of a question. The other example could be just diving deeper or like into diligence. So, or like, or the company. So like just asking you your investment thesis of that company. So let's say you're looking at, like an airline or like an airline that that does like these water taxi services, let's say in Mauritius or Maldives, right? So you're looking at that company. So they will want to know, what's the thesis? Why do you want to invest in this company? What could go wrong? What are the risks? How can you mitigate the risks? How do you see this growing? How do you see how do you see profit margins trending in the 5 years, right? So very operational things. And like, what will you actually do if you were to do that investment?
And in the US, what would some examples?
I mean, very similar, right? Like I give you an example of just a company, but the way you think about it is going to be the same. What's my thesis? What's the how is it expected to grow? How are the costs going to trend? What can go wrong? What are the risks and mitigants? And where can I add value?
So give me examples of all these questions that you asked, like what are things that can go wrong, etc. So can you give me an example? What would your typical answer be to these questions? Like just taking any random industry or random company, what would your answers be is what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, so let's take the same example of the airline, right? Like, so the thesis could be that tourism is a booming sector, especially in India, where you have a lot of more affluent Indians traveling abroad. This is a great way to reach Mauritius or hop from internally in the islands, right? So there's a lot of demand expected in the next 5 years. That could be the thesis. And then how do you add value is like you can expand it to different similar geographies, similar nearby countries. If you or you're able to, as you scale up, you're able to save on costs and economies of scale. So you could be able to increase your margins. Or the thesis could be that I will increase my margins by X percentage points over the next 5 years, or I'm going to grow my sales by 10% every year doing X, Y, Z. And then the third thing would be like, what could go wrong, and like what mitigants, and then how do you exit, right? So what could go wrong is like geopolitical risks, right? Tomorrow, India and Mauritius or like Maldives, which would really happen, right? Like you have these geopolitical risks, geopolitical tensions where Indians stop going to that country. In this case, it's Indian, but it could be anything, right? Like for example, what's happening now with all the Middle East conflict, a lot of US airlines have stopped, have canceled their flights to India. Now, if that lasts longer, you are going to, you either, and if that's your entire business, you'll have to shut shop. So anything would go wrong in terms of geopolitics, or like, for example, that's one example. The other thing could be like you have increased competition, like you have other airlines coming in, or you have other modes of transport. So maybe you have faster boats or faster ships that could actually do the same job much more comfortably and much cheaper, right? So there are you have to think of it very holistically, right? Like you're going to hold it for 5 years. So you have to think what all can happen in the next 5 years, right? So it's not just like, oh, today it's a great investment, sure, but like I'm going to exit, I'm going to sell the company after 5 years. So one, I have to grow it in those 5 years. And after 5 years, I need to find a buyer to sell that company to. So that buyer at the end of 5 years should also think, oh, I can hold it for 5 more years and still exit. So you kind of have to think about it from a 10-year horizon, but you have to, and 10 years is a long term in a fast-paced world like this, that anything can happen. So I think it's a lot about like being able to think through all the possibilities, not all, but like the main possibilities of how you can grow, what can go right, what can go wrong, things like that.
And do you get time to prepare for your interviews? Let's say like they give you a case study on Friday and then you have to submit on Monday, or all of these are like immediate interviews?
More often than not, they are immediate. It's very like consulting. Well, you'll get the case study, you have 2 minutes to think about it, and you have to answer. Yeah. If it's a modeling round, maybe you get the weekend, or again, it could be on the spot. Really depends on how detailed they want you to be the model. Case studies typically I've seen are more often than not there and there.
Got it. How many rounds of interviews did you give when you worked in the Indian PE fund?
I don't remember that, but it must have easily been 5 or 6.
Okay. And in the US, how many rounds?
Similar.
Oh, 5 or 6.
Yeah. I mean, so my first job, I interviewed for an internship, right? So four rounds, for one on campus and then 3 in person at their office. But I didn't have a lot of, I didn't have a modeling round because I was applying for an internship. They had the opportunity to test my modeling skills on the job. So it could be a bit different. For the current role that I joined last year as a VP at Unigestion, a different level, but I had 2 or 3 interviews here. I had 2 interviews with people in Switzerland, and then I had a modeling round. So yeah, 4 or 5 I think is a good ballpark.
Okay. And the fund that you're working with, so this is not a US based fund.
It's a Swiss asset manager.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Got it.
I work for the New York office, so I work for the North America team.
Okay, got it. And usually, like from what I understand, typically like the teams are very lean, very small in these.
Yes, funds, right? Yes. So we are on the investment team in New York. At my current fund, we are like 6.
Oh.
My previous firm, we were like 40 in New York. But you're right, the teams are very lean. But that's just it's very standard for private equity in general. Typically, it lean teams, very fast-paced diligences. So you have short bursts, and so lots happening in those few weeks because everything is time sensitive. You don't want anything to leak. You're trying to do the transaction exclusively. So lean teams, fast-paced, short bursts.